folks. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. This is Dan Lizette, and this is episode 86. Thank you guys for coming back and joining me. Last week's show, I'm sure, helped fill up your subscription list with the 4 great shows that Ray Laughlin and I recommended to you folks. I said at the end of that episode that I'd be back this week with another great interview, and that's exactly what I am prepared to do right now. And I am going back to one of my favorite genres, as you guys have heard me talk about many times, the storytelling genre, and one of my favorite collectives. It's called The Herd. In fact, this will be the 4th show and creator that I have featured from The Herd, going back in time a little bit. I once talked to Vanessa Lowe way back on episode 36, Jonathan Hirsch from Arrivals back on episode 40, Rob McGinley Myers on episode 49, and Tally Abacassis on episode 59. Those are 4 hosts and producers of their excellent shows on The Herd. But there is one gentleman that I've been wanting to reach out to for a while. In fact, he's the founder of The Herd, and his show on The Herd is called Neighbors. His name, have you guys figured it out yet? No, Jakob Lewis. Jakob Lewis joins me for the first time on the Podcast Digest. Jacob, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me, and we got lots to talk about for any of those folks who haven't heard about Neighbors. I think they're going to like what they hear. But before we jump into the show and jump into the collective, The Herd, I want folks to get to know a little bit about yourself. Can you tell people a little bit about pre-Neighbors days, where you're from, what it was like growing up, all that fun stuff?
Okay, let me take you back and paint a picture. I'm from Missouri, a small town in the middle of Missouri called Rolla, R-O-L-L-A. And, well, I was born in Frankfurt, Germany, actually, because my dad was in the military, and I was born on a military base. But grew up in Missouri, went to college in Southern Illinois, got married, and moved to the lovely city of Nashville, Tennessee, where I've been here about almost 7 years now, and have lived in the same neighborhood that entire time, and just like connected and called this place home from day one. And I don't know, what else do you want to know?
Well, what were you doing before Neighbors became a thing? Did you go to school for something in particular, or line of work?
Yeah,
like
it doesn't make any sense. I went to school for music and ended up with a degree in religion, moved to St. Louis for a brief bit after college and worked with adults with autism. Then I went and fought forest fires in Northern California. Then that's when I moved to Nashville right after that. And what did I do? I was unemployed for a while. Then I started to paint houses and do demolition work. And then my next door neighbor was a cabinet maker and needed help moving a cabinet one day into his truck. And he's like, "Hey, I'll give you $10 if you help me load this into my truck." And I was like, "Absolutely." As I was like wiping the, cereal milk off my mustache there and getting off the couch, I was like, "Yeah, I'll help you move that." And that turned into an apprenticeship at a cabinet shop with this very talented, amazing woodworker. And so I was like really into the like craftsman woodworking thing for like 3.5 years. But it evolved into more of a factory job. And I really felt isolated and was like sanding and spraying lacquer for 8 hours a day every day. And so that's when I started to listen to a lot of podcasts and fell in love with the medium. And as I was discerning, what the heck do I do next? Because all of those things were just kind of like there. They weren't real decisions that I made. They were just me kind of going along with the circumstances of my surroundings. And one day I was listening to a This American Life episode, and it just was very emotional, and it hit me. And I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do. I think that this would be a good challenge for my creativity. All the like talking to everybody and all these interesting topics will be really great for my ADHD because it's always interesting. And I was also in a band for a long time in college, and so I have like experience with sound design and music production, and I'm a curious person. I just thought this might work, and that's when I downloaded the This American Life comic book from This American Life's website, which Jessica Abel made, who she has a new book called Out on the Wire, which is awesome, which is really helpful illustrated guide to how to make radio. And then I applied to the Transom Story Workshop, which is an amazing radio boot camp for 2 months with some amazing producers and 8 other people, students that go to Cape Cod for 2 months, and it's wonderful. And then I came back and was working at Trader Joe's until last weekend, actually.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. While I was making my podcast.
Wow, I'll tell you what, it reminds me of previous guests, and longtime listeners of the Podcast Digest will realize that an early guest in January of this year, Allison Behringer of The Intern. She's got about the only resume prior to podcasting that I could maybe compare to that path you just drew out for us in terms of eclecticness, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
It's great because I imagine... it's funny. I'm a people manager at my day job. I supervise a large staff of data entry people, basically, and some of my reports that are more frontline managers. Oftentimes we get in conversations about leadership, and we talk a lot about. I talk a lot about previous managers that I've had. That what you do is you pick up, a certain piece of each one. You take the best parts of each one of them and try to integrate in yourself to put your best front forward. I imagine with a resume like yours, with a working history like yours or schooling history, that I imagine you are borrowing bits and pieces from all of this in sort of what you're doing now with Neighbors.
Sure.
Well, I'm thinking, you're schooling for religion. You talked about kind of the craftiness of the, the cabinet making type thing. There's elements of this I can see in listening to Neighbors, or am I just stretching this?
Well, I mean, I will say I do owe the cabinet shop the ability to systematically think about what I do, because otherwise I think it would just be this. I would never get a story done. To be able to systematize, and because I had to make cut lists and draw up schematics and follow them, and go step by step and not just try to. I can't just do the part I'm excited about. I have to first cut the wood down to size, and and so that discipline was something that I greatly needed and still do, but certainly gleaned a lot from that.
You mentioned the Transom storytelling workshop. The Transom in that group and the website has made an appearance on the show as well a couple of weeks back when I spoke with Al Letson from Reveal.
Oh, wow.
And Al was talking, we discussed the manifesto he wrote for Transom, which was amazing. Yeah. And so tell me a little bit more about that experience going through that boot camp style training. Did you literally go in with, besides the band background, little to no experience and come out the other end as just ready to take on the world? What was that like?
I mean, I had been doing, I think at that point I had done 2 or 3 episodes of Neighbors. And my first story took me I can't remember how many months it took me. It took a very long time. So I had a little bit of experience, but it was completely in isolation. And so I think that is the beauty of Transom, is that I had 2 months that were set aside from my normal life to focus on something intensely in a beautiful setting, Cape Cod, with 8 other curious, interested, and eager people. And we were living together, we were sharing meals together, and every day we'd walk into class and there's Rob Rosenthal, who's just the kindest man you'll ever meet. And he's always wearing shorts. He never wears pants. And he would play us radio pieces at the beginning of each class. So we're just constantly getting washed over with just great storytelling from way, way back in time to current stuff. And he's playing other student examples. And then he would teach us, the first week's all about it's like trial by fire of here's a recorder, go out into the community. We're going to do these few small projects like a Vox Pop. Do you know what a Vox Pop is?
I'm afraid I don't.
It's a Vox Pop is like that man on the street interview where you just go someplace and then ask everybody the same question and then string them together. We're here down in downtown Manhattan to ask people about the new barbecue joint, and they all say something, and then it's just a very simple kind of Mr. Miyagi task in the radio world to get all of these certain elements of the craft together in one simple project. And so we started out doing that. or actually, I think we started out like just interviewing classmates, and then we just sent us out on the street. And then we make a small piece that actually airs on the radio station in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. And then we make a longer piece of our choosing. And I think the magic of it, in addition to all of that, is that there's amazing speakers that come in, from people that just Skype in, but also like Nancy Updike was there for a few days, Robert Krulwich was there for a few days, and they just exude all of their wisdom. But like Nancy actually like listened to some of our stuff, and we talked about story pitches, and it was just a really amazing time. And then at the end of it, I have created something, but I also am completely out of my isolation. And for me, that was the biggest thing, like being in that cabinet shop completely isolated, to having the inspiration to do something, but then hitting a wall with the form of it because I was clueless and I needed shepherding, and then to go to some place where there's 8 other people that feel the same way, so there's solidarity, and then there's all of these shepherds just to guide us along, in 2 months to fail gloriously until we succeed, and it was awesome.
It sounds absolutely amazing.
And you're in Cape Cod, yeah.
Yep, which doesn't hurt either, I imagine.
No, I saw whales, and it was awesome.
I think I've gone out of timeline here a bit, Jacob. Didn't mean to, but so you mentioned that you were at the cabinet shop and you were listening to radio and realized that this is what you wanted to do and you wanted to give a shot to. And so take me up to the idea conception, the origin story, if you will, of Neighbors. You decide you want to start making storytelling, podcasting, or radio. Where did you start to? You could have done anything, right? Why Neighbors? Why Nashville centric? How did that whole thought process work?
This is something I still run up against. It's a little fuzzy, to be honest. I'm not sure, and I don't remember the place that I was when I saw the flux capacitor and figured out time travel. Like I know that I came up with the idea, the name of Neighbors, and it just I'm a very instinctual person, and there was just something about that was like, this is a thing. It is like a vision, and I don't know why, but I want to follow that word. But I also constantly run up against, like, I'm very uncomfortable with the term journalist, although I am a journalist, and I do own that in a very real way. But I'm uncomfortable with it because I understand that I'm never telling, like if I did a story on you, Dan, I'm never telling your story. I'm telling my story of you. And it feels like the thing that I'm most qualified to do that with is the actual people that are in my life around me, because it gets a little more difficult, and I just get more uncomfortable, and it's a discomfort that I am willing and wanting and trying to lean into more. But there was just something that was like, you know what? I'm in a place. I love this place. It's a special place. I want to know it more, and I want to. I want to get to know the people around me. And so that's what I started doing. And I hope that sphere grows. But it just was a compelling vision for me. And I can't quite articulate it, but I can tell you that I feel it in my gut, even right now as we're talking.
Well, what's interesting about that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, and I'm sure you've had this similar thought process, is that while Neighbors was born out of a Nashville-centric point of view, the concept of Neighbors can be pretty much, universally appealing. Everyone understands it. Everyone has their own, if you will, whether it be proximate or, in a classroom or in a workplace or whatever the case may be. So there is a lot of transference of the concept that should be relatable to just about anyone.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly, like, the truth that the universal is next door, that everybody, we are connected in this human story that I'll frame this next part this way, is that I racked my brain and we're jumping ahead in the timeline again here, but this is relevant. I racked my brain when I signed up with Nashville Public Radio to come up with a new tagline. And you should have seen the lists that I made of like all these new taglines, because I was trying to frame, what is this show? And And one thing that I kept coming back to that I couldn't quite articulate in a tagline, but is that this idea that everything is ordinary. Like, maybe next door is a serial killer, okay? And it's like everybody has that capacity in them to be a serial killer. And maybe next door is a guy that was in Vietnam and like can't sleep at night and wakes up in terror. Maybe next door is a single mom that's working really hard and supporting like 3 kids by herself. My point is that all of that stuff is around us and it's ordinary, and we all like it's just all there. I don't know, man, I still cannot quite articulate it. But that everything's ordinary, and that we can peek next door and we can find all of that, and it all fits from the most grotesque thing to the nicest, quaintest story. And it's all there, possibly next door. One city block contains so much, and it's just like infinite, but it all fits.
I think a perfect example is, we've only been talking for 16 minutes here, Jacob, and I think what you're saying there is exactly what we found out about you already, right? I mean, your resume, your backstory before you ever even started Neighbors, I don't know that many people knew that you did this for a little while, you did that for a little while, and I think that's emblematic of that each individual probably has a rich backstory that you just drive to your house through a neighborhood, and if you just did it at 5 miles an hour and slowly turned your head from left to right, all those stories are living under those roofs every day, all the time, and getting built more and more and becoming more and more rich as time goes by.
Right.
And one of the things Neighbors is doing is kind of bringing those stories out.
Yeah, and I'm under no illusion that like I'm, really doing that in a big way, but in my contribution, in my small way, I'm doing that. Yes.
So let's talk about that first episode. You
Okay.
mentioned in passing it took months. I want to hear about. So how did you settle on the first idea of the first show?
No one's asked me that before. Honestly, I was at a storytelling event where this pastor got up and was talking about what it's like to be a priest, and that he has this role of father, and he's a father to a community, but he's an Anglican priest, so he's married and has kids, so he's also a father to actual children, but he's also has his own biological father who was an alcoholic and just a brilliant but difficult man. And so he shared this story at the storytelling event about how he visits people on their deathbed all the time, and what his role is there, and how he's trying to be a proxy father for people who are dying, and say, hey, is there anything you need? Can I get anybody on the phone? Is there anything you want to tell me and get off your chest? Can I get you a meal? Whatever it is. And then one day he gets the call that his dad's in hospice and dying, and it was kind of sudden. And so he drives up, and he's got this troubled relationship with his own father, and is like at his deathbed, and he's trying to have that priestly fatherly role for his own father. And his dad just keeps rejecting it. Like, no, like, how are you? How's the kids? How's your family? How's your job? Like, what's going on in your world? What are your hopes and dreams? And they were just kind of like fighting and like hitting a wall. And finally his dad said, you know what, if you want to do something for me, you can go get me some scotch. And Thomas was the priest's name. He just kind of like in shock. He's like, okay. And he leaves and he goes and gets the nicest bottle of scotch he can find. And when he comes back, the nurses had put his dad on a morphine drip, and he's incoherent, and he never got to have a meaningful conversation with him. And then at the very end, he realizes that, he was trying to father his own father, and it was completely inappropriate. The dying wish of his own father was to be a father to him, and it was actually like a very meaningful thing in retrospect. And that story just like, it hit all of my narrative goosebumps, and it tapped into something that I still follow to this day. Is just my gut. Like I feel something when I heard that story, and so that's when I took my really cheap recorder and microphone into his office and asked him if he would tell me that story. And I got a little bit more background information and produced a pretty terrible piece that kind of gets into the weeds and is comically sound designed, but I did it, and it took a really long time. I think just because of like all the normal things that creative, struggling, starving artists go through, and just their own crap and their own heads, and my own fear of showing something to the world that was like mediocre. That's why it took so long. And once I got over that, I put it out there and put a name on it and called it Neighbors and tried to keep going.
So what was the reaction like once it was released?
Very minimal. I mean, my stats were pathetic. I mean, they were horrendous. And but I was excited. I was like, man, this kind of almost sounds like something I've heard before. This kind of sounds like a This American Life episode, or maybe, and I got really excited just about, man, I'm playing the game. This is cool.
After Transom was complete, looking back at that first episode, are there specific things you now hear that you wish you would have done differently? You mentioned sound design, but is it a dramatic overhaul if you could do it all over again? Or is it just kind of like, hey, looking back at my first try, considering I hadn't gone through the workshop yet, that wasn't too bad?
Yeah, no, I'm proud of it. But if I was doing it today, I'd do it completely different from a technical standpoint, from how I like mic'd him to, the equipment I used, but also to like how I would have asked him the questions. I would have turned off the air conditioner in the room. I would have, I would have probably interjected a lot more into my interview just to clarify a few things. And I would have, there's this whole backstory that I followed in Texas that was completely irrelevant that I would have cut out. It would have probably been shorter.
I'm looking through, you are currently actively, as we speak now, on season 3, correct?
Yeah.
I'm looking through
which is a completely made-up construct that I just implemented, yes.
It's funny, Jacob, I've had that conversation with several other hosts and producers about the concept of season and whatnot, and exactly what you just said is kind of why I've gone away from talking about it. I just sort of accept whatever framework the producer has set up, and I run with it, because so many people think of this and there's a lot of passionate thoughts about it. I do it because I need a break, or I do it because it's not a predictable schedule. The type of show I produce is not a predictable schedule, and this, that, and the other. And there's all these different reasons, and they're all valid. And the reality is, I think people can name them whatever they want to name them. I got in a conversation on Twitter last week about should I use episode titles, episode numbers, both? Should the date be in there, or does it matter?
Right.
And the reality is, it's whatever you want it to be, right? If you want seasons or not, I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, no, it's. I'm constantly with that, struggling with how do I frame what I'm doing? How do I package what I'm doing? How do I market what I'm doing? Because that's not what I'm good at, and it's part of my job. And so, I struggle with it. But I am attracted to the seasons idea because I am all about rest. I want rest. I want rest to be a part of my life. I want seasons to be a part of my life. And actual seasons to be a part of my life. And so, I think this feels right, although I haven't quite worked out what the actual parameters of a season are yet. But
their length, how many episodes, time of year, none of that really matters.
Yeah, it matters a bunch, and I haven't figured it out.
Yeah, there you go. But you're currently on season 3, more or less. And throughout these seasons, as we've talked about, there is a Nashville undertone, if you will. You've brought in local businesses. Obviously, many of the episodes are about people who live in or around.
Yes.
But you've also featured some of sort of the, I don't know what the right word to put it, community causes or kind of events central to the community. You talk about the floods, right, and so on and so forth.
I can't get away from it. It's in everybody's story.
Exactly. Yeah. What I'm curious about with that being so prevalent, and we're going to talk about Nashville Public Radio in just a little bit, but I'm curious when I talk about reaction, how do you have any concept of what it's like to how the reception's been in Nashville itself?
Yeah, recently it's been better and more exuberant, and I'm like getting feedback more. But I guess I don't pay a ton of attention to that. I think that it's received. I mean, all I really know is my community and the people that talk to me that I'm friends with seem to like it. People want to always tell me about what they're listening to and ask me about cereal and things like that. But
when you say the word podcast,
right? Yeah.
let me ask you this.
But I mean, yeah, sure, it's good.
Well, good. I was curious because it's so so many of the episodes are so local. I just get this concept like Jacob walking through the grocery store and he hears it coming out of somebody's Bluetooth speaker, or he walks to the from the 7-Eleven and it's coming out of somebody's car speakers, and hey, that's me,
Yeah,
I
would go home and write about that in my diary if that happened. that hasn't happened yet. I'm
going out on a limb here, Jacob. I think that day's coming.
All right,
I'm telling you, I think that day's coming.
No, well, I'm certainly like, I am only my voice. I am not like the voice of, this place. It's only my experience of this place. So,
well, we talked a little bit about early on the Cabinet work was such solitary, and then you worked with these the other 8 attendees of the Transom Storytelling Workshop, and then not long thereafter, you started working with a group of people. The Herd was born, and I want to hear all about this because I've talked to other members, as I mentioned up front, but this was, in essence, at least in original thought, your idea?
So you want the real story?
The real story. Give it to me real. We can go back to Jonathan, Vanessa, and all them and say, now I got the real story.
No, they are part of the real story. It was birthed from, well, kind of what I said about the cabinet shop, right? I'm isolated. And then when I quit, I was still trying to make radio in isolation. But then I go to Transom and I have this amazing community. And it's just, I'm living there. I'm breathing it. And then when I go home, I'm on like a listserv email thing, which it's great and it's helpful. And I joined the Association of Independents in Radio, or AIR, which is also like another great email community. But it's, you can only go so far with that. And I felt isolated again all of a sudden. I went from this kind of community high to here I am in my office with my dogs barking, and I just can't move forward. And so as I was making my show, I started to like percolate this idea. And it was actually when I was heading on the way up to Third Coast. Which, do you know what Third Coast is?
Yes, I've heard plenty of my previous guests have mentioned it.
Yeah, it's like the radio producer mecca. It's a beautiful conference full of wonderful things in Chicago, and it only happens every 2 years. And I was incredibly poor and took the megabus up there to Chicago from Nashville, and we had a flat tire and all sorts of things. Anyway, it took me like 12 hours-ish, something like that. And on the way up, just in the space as I watched the cornfields go by, my frustration, like I could just feel like this inner frustration of like, I feel like I'm going to be with all of these people, my people, but I know I'm just going to leave again and be back in my office with my dogs barking. And so I just started thinking like, I don't think Radiotopia is going to sign me up. And I live in the middle of the country where there's nothing going on. There's nothing. I'm like one of the few radio producers in Nashville that is doing this kind of audio. And I don't say that as like a pompous thing. It's just like it actually really sucks. And that sense has grown a little bit. But in that frustration, I started doodling all these names of like, what would I call my Radiotopia? What would it even look like? How would it function? And then I got to Third Coast and I saw some of my old Transom buddies were there, and I was staying with a few of them at somebody's house in Chicago, and I pitched them some of the names, and then I said The Herd, but I was like, it's HEARD, huh? And they were like, yeah, I like that one, which you can't see on the radio, which is terrible, as I say, The Herd. But and then I kind of pitched a few people on it at the conference, and none of which joined, but who I respect greatly. And then reached out to Jonathan Hirsch first, just on a complete lark. I just saw him online, saw the show, thought that he was doing something really cool. We were kind of in similar places where we're both early on. And he latched onto it with such enthusiasm because he's a very enthusiastic guy. And we took off and we started the search. And that's when we added Vanessa, Rob, Tally, and Marlo. And, just kind of did our thing and launched.
So for folks who don't know about it, how does this work? This is not a Radiotopia at all. It's set up a little bit differently, I understand. Tell folks how it was originally designed to be, and kind of week in, week out, month in, month out. How do you guys work together?
Yeah, I mean, basically the idea was of what is it? What's the saying? A rising tide raises all boats. Is that right?
I think so.
Did I butcher that?
I think that sounds good.
Okay. Yeah. That was the idea, that I wanted to be a part of a community that that my success is going to help you, and that your success is going to help me, and that's it. And if you want to leave, you can leave. And you don't owe me anything. I don't owe you anything other than my desire to see myself and you succeed. So there was kind of a mutual dependence there. And we decided that we would cross-promote one another at the end of our episodes, that we would provide knowledge, resources, and reach. So the knowledge piece is that, we weren't at the time with big institutions. And a lot of us didn't. I had never worked in an office, for instance. So I didn't know basic administrative tasks, like a spreadsheet, time management. These were not my fortes, but somebody in the herd actually was really good at those things. And I actually learned a ton about planning from Jonathan Hirsch. And I've learned a lot about sound design from Vanessa. And I've learned Rob is a very deep thinker and a kind of has good business acumen. And is that a right word? Acumen?
Yep.
Excellent.
I think you're good. Rob would approve.
Yes. And that's something that I've really gleaned from him. And Marlo is so courageous, and Tally is both Marlo and Tally, their stories are so intimate. And so it's just been really great to get all of that knowledge and experience from one another. But then resources, actually getting feedback and editing and tape syncs and people contributing music and just emotional support. That's been phenomenal. And then the reach is the cross promotion and just being, greater than we would be individually. We're reaching more people.
And this is not just theoretical, right? Jacob, this is very practical. I know I've heard in the credits of so many Herd shows, editing thanks to, sound design thanks to, or you feature each other's episodes. I mean, this is hands-on. You guys are really helping each other out.
Yeah. Well, we like each other. That's the thing.
That's a good thing.
I did get some feedback early on of people worried, okay, what about when this thing goes south? And it's a very good question, but there's no strings attached to this thing. I just like these people. I trust them, and I admire their work. And I feel that mutual respect, and it just works. So it's a great thing.
And I don't ask this, and I don't want you to, but I don't ask this in hopes that you would air any dirty laundry. That's not why I ask. I ask this because there may be other people wondering about the benefits or potential pitfalls of an arrangement like this, and maybe considering something self. There are a ton, right, of independent podcast networks. You hear them all the time in the independent podcast scene. So what I'm curious about is sort of, where have you seen now? Because the Herd is it a year? Or more than a year?
It is.
It passed a year.
March. Yeah, it's almost a year. Maybe we should be celebrating a birthday. Happy birthday to the Herd,
around that time,
everybody.
Right?
This is what this episode's all about.
There you go.
Celebration.
So, but talking out there, if you could talk to some of the people who also have independent podcast networks or are considering joining one or starting their own, sort of what have you seen are, you talked a lot about the benefits right there, the collaborative nature and support and so forth. But if you had to give any words of sort of warning or what potential pitfalls you've seen, again, not throwing anyone under the bus, but just generally speaking, what are some kind of words of guidance or advice would you give those folks?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that I've struggled with the herd is this idea of leadership. There needs, because I didn't want to be the CEO of the herd. I didn't want to be like the businessman of the herd or that kind of thing. And I think that's like, if you want to make money, like that might be a good business model, and that's might be what a listener should do, is become a network that is monetizing this, and there's a system and a hierarchy and all that stuff. That's just not how I wanted to do this. And at the same time, somebody needs to like be the greatest among equals and serve the group with leadership. And I tried various ways to do that. And it got a little businessy. Like I just kept on like having these visions of, how do I grow us? How do I get us out there? How do we start making money? Which was in direct conflict with the original vision of, well, we're all independent. We all own our own shows, and we're going to help each other get there, and we can share contacts, and we can share like business ideas and strategies that have worked. And we could even do stuff together, but we're not bound by financially operating together. And so there was just a point where I just remember like getting the feedback of like, you know what, I'm not sure this is what we all signed up for. And me being like, you know what, you're absolutely right. And so the leadership thing has been kind of tossed around to different people, taking the lead on either their, how busy they are that season or whatever. But it's really just about facilitating our connection at this point, keeping us connected. Who's going to call the meeting? Who's going to actually make the Google Hangout link to send to everybody for our weekly meeting? But I mean, my honest thing is that's just us, and that's just worked for us. It's worked for me, and this thing has evolved, and I would say whatever works, go for it.
Well, next I want to ask you sort of about sort of the journey so far and what the feedback's been like and so on and so forth. But I want you to answer through this context. We talked a little bit earlier about sort of the episodes that I've put out that you may or may not have heard. And obviously with your calendar and schedule, you haven't listened to every one of the Podcast Digest episodes. And possibly you haven't heard my conversation with Roman Mars from Radio
No, I saw that and I was like, ooh, I got to listen to that.
I can tell you that the herd came up in that conversation, and Roman Mars knows well about you guys.
Oh, wow.
So this is true. It's on tape. You can hear it in that interview. So because I brought it up as an example of sort of along the lines of the question I just asked you with other groups doing that and the idea of Radiotopia expanding and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And now they've got something out there currently as we speak. But the point of the matter is, the reason I bring that up is the herd now has a level of exposure a year in that it clearly didn't 12 months ago. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what has this ride been like? I
mean, it's just really cool. I mean, I'm just incredibly grateful, and I mean, like, I'm at this point actually, and this is, I mean, I kind of chuckle when I say this, but like, this was as high as I had dreamed. And so I'm kind of at this point of like, oh, there's more? Like, do I even want more? I don't even know. I mean, success looks different for everybody. So I'm just, honestly, I'm very grateful and just trying to stay there. But it's been good. I mean, when I look at my stats, it is interesting to see like how many listeners are in New York City or how many listeners are in Seattle. That's weird to me because I just would assume that, there's my like family and friends and then like one more sphere out maybe. But like a lot of people are hearing this and it's freaky. But I'm incredibly grateful.
It's all about growth and evolution, and there's one more step I want to talk about. But before I get there, I wanted to jump into, you mentioned sort of kind of how we've been talking about sort of how some of the episodes had a local tone to them, if you will, and your amazement of sort of these other localities listen to it. But not every episode, so to speak, had,
Correct.
A local appeal. Others sort of really were kind of regardless of location. And I just wanted to talk about, and I mentioned to you before we hit the record button for this episode, a personal favorite, and maybe if you could talk a little bit about this episode and how it came together. Because, folks, if you've not heard of Neighbors at all, I will tell you a great place to start. It's personal preference. I think they're all great. But the High Five, released on October 16th of last year, 2015, is a personal favorite to me. And I've talked a lot about, folks, you've probably heard me say about those episodes that just make you stop and listen to what you're hearing and literally stop you in your tracks type deal. This was one of the ones that was just so intriguing. It was a great story. Jacob, can you tell folks a little bit about that episode and kind of how it came together? I'm sort of interested in the backstory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that means a lot to me that you like it so much. I was having coffee with my friend Andy, who the story's about, and he's kind of an enigma of a man because he's very he loves games and sports, and I'm not a sports guy, he really loves sports, and has this like kind of just surface level appearance at first, but he's actually an incredibly deep human being, deep thinker and deep feeler. And we were just having coffee, and we were just talking about this idea of fidelity, of like how habit shapes me, and that I want to be formed well by the habits that I do. And there's so many habits that I do that don't form me well. Like when I roll out of bed and, first thing I do is like check Twitter and stuff. Like not like when I'm 60 years old, I don't think I'm going to be better because of that, but like having coffee with a friend once a week, I think I might be better at 60 years old because of that. So this idea of fidelity to the mundane producing fruit for a beautiful life and a rich and meaningful life in the long run was something that like I could just feel in my bones. And then he told me that he's like, I'm doing this thing. It's kind of weird, but me and my friend Gabe are we go on tour once a year, and we have so much fun with each other, and we live like so close to each other in town. But when we get off a tour, and it's just like a Christmas tour, so it's like 3 weeks in December, when they get off the road, they don't see each other at all, and they're like, "What the heck?" And it's been going on for years. And so they decided, we need something that's just completely an artifice to get us to connect. We live so close to one another. Let's just walk from each other's house and give each other a high five in the middle. And that's what they did. And they immediately latched onto the idea, and they're like, we got to do this for like 30 years. And anybody else, that would be like wishful thinking. But with Andy, it's like, oh, that's going to happen. He's just kind of got that crazy streak in him. And so I just kind of took note of it. And then he said, if you want to come on a high five, like you can come, because we've been having guest high fives. And so I did, and I brought my microphone and just recorded it. And the conversation that I got while walking, it was like, wow, this is really meaningful to them. And I think it's really meaningful to me actually too. And so I started to draw parallels with other things in my life, and I use this analogy of an artist at the beginning of the episode, which I won't spoil for anybody. But yeah, I just followed him, and like that's the beauty of it. It's like actually that was such an ordinary, mundane thing. Like when I went with him, like it was so anticlimactic. Like high five, that was it. We were done. Wow, yay! But there is something to it, of being faithful in the mundane things over and over, and I think that comes through in the episode.
It was brilliant, and my best summation, and you pulled those themes and the story out of something that may have felt mundane into terrific audio. I loved it. I actually think I listened to it twice, and wow. I never listen to anything twice because of my subscription list and how many different shows I listen to and so on and so forth. It was
Dude.
It was that good. So
you're making my day.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that, particular episode up, and just point to that as, folks, if you're just hearing about Jakob or The Herd or Neighbors for the first time, and give you my most enthusiastic personal endorsement for a starting point, and then you can kind of, go from there. And there are tons of others ones. I mean, and I really think, especially now, Jakob, I think Neighbors and your show, I think it's a more, it definitely falls in the category for me as I really think the best stuff's ahead of you, because you're like trending in the right way as far as I'm concerned, because now it's become like, I mean, in recent episodes, I mean, the Tuba Man was amazing as well, and the one with the baker's son, which was just, crazy in the sense of, he had this, condition and the family he grew up in and so on and so forth. And so the stories are just, they're getting so great, and I love it. And, the work that you guys are putting out now is amazing.
Thank you. But
the recent work now in season 3, artificial season 3, came with a big announcement.
Yeah.
Tell folks about that. And how did this happen exactly?
Yeah. Well, let's see. The announcement is that now I have partnered with Nashville Public Radio, which if you mumble it kind of sounds like National Public Radio, which you can get away with sometimes, which is awesome. It's been really wonderful. I've been talking to them for a long time, and it was just a matter of like, how do we make this work? And finally, it was like it was kind of funny. The sense that I got was on their end, they were like wanting it to work really badly, but just didn't know how, because I was a podcast, and they just haven't like ventured into that territory, which is new territory for a lot of public radio stations right now that everybody's trying to figure out. And they just, said, tell us how it works. And I was like, well, I don't know either. Let's figure it out. And so we did, and they've been incredibly supportive. And I am talking to you right now from an amazing, huge soundproof studio that like is where I live 5 days a week now. And like, that's such a huge gift in my life to have a quiet, consistent space that I can work out of. And yeah, they promote me on the air, online. I'm paring down my stories for air, so I have 4.5-minute versions that air. And it's just great to be like I said, I've never worked in an office before, so I get pens, and it's really exciting, and notebooks.
Are there Neighbors pens yet?
No, I've not. I made stickers early on that were the really cheap kind, and so like on the back of my car, I now have like a blurry adhesive circle that's like residue because they weren't waterproof. But it's on my list. I really want somebody. This is a call to the world. I want somebody to design the Tuba Troll T-shirt. And if you don't know what that means, you have to listen to the Tuba Man episode, because I think the world.
You're talking about from
troll.
His inspiration, right?
Yes.
Why okay. I'm making sure I was getting the reference. Okay.
Yes. Because he's the Tuba Troll. I would love for somebody to design that, because I think that needs to happen.
Well, it's funny. This sounds like, again, and cut me off if I'm being too, highfalutin about this concept here. But for somebody in the cabinet making shop listening to This American Life and getting inspired to now, and what, a year and a half, 2 years to now be in a public radio studio?
Yeah,
I mean,
what
that's
the heck?
not all the way to This American Life, right? But that's a heck of a long distance traveled. I think that's pretty great. I mean, do you get this concept that like there's this idea of like you were in the process of living out a dream? Yeah,
it's freaky. And you know what? I'm always like kind of motivated by what I don't have, and so it's kind of like, well, what now? But yeah, it's freaky, and so I'm just, I said it earlier, but I'm just grateful and just trying to not let the pressure, there's a new sense of pressure, but it could be seen as anxiety, but I tend to see it as excitement, and yeah, I'm just holding on, man, keeping my head down and trying to grind it out.
Well, I think it's great. I when I heard that, I was like, wow, this is awesome, and it's funny because it's, You mentioned earlier about the herd and about how, there's no concept of necessarily competition or anybody could leave when they want, and there's no, financial bonding in the whole situation. But it's interesting to kind of see what individual shows have done or grown or sort of evolved over time. I remember talking back, I think, with either Jonathan or Rob telling me how sort of, Vanessa and Nocturne was the herd's first kind of like breakout hit, chart topper type deal. And now to see Neighbors evolve into a member of the public radio family, is kind of a big deal. And it's like, as you keep seeing these family members, if you will, in the herd kind of grow up, it's gotta make you feel good, and it's gotta say a lot about the six of you.
Yeah, and I'll say this, I can't reveal too much, but there's some cool stuff going on with other people of the herd that is not been shared yet. That I'm really like, there's some cool stuff going on, and it does feel good, and it's like, my brothers and sisters are being successful in the world. It's really cool. So, yeah, I'm very happy.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And again, folks, as I always say, if you've not heard about this, links will be in the show notes. You need to go check out these shows and this collective, because just from the time I've known about them to today, a lot has changed. A lot has, grown, and like we've been describing. So, well, Jacob, last question for you.
Okay.
What do you think the future of Neighbors holds? We mentioned a little bit about season format, but just generally speaking, sort of where's your vision, like the next 6, 12, 18 months? What would you like to see happen? What could listeners expect?
Yeah, that's a great question that I should ask myself more often. I like, one thing that I've found is that I don't like, I used to produce the show much more irregularly. And now it's like, with the radio station, I've made a commitment to do every 2 weeks. And that, when I did that, I knew I could do it, but it was a very scary proposition for me, because when I, this is hard for me. It's hard to do. And when I finish an episode, there's like kind of like a whiplash effect where I've just poured my life into, a 20 to 30 minute documentary on a subject or person, and then I've got to immediately turn around and start it over again. And it's an emotional thing for me. Like I do put a lot into it. And so I'm learning now that, like, it doesn't matter how I feel. I can still do the work. And like, I was like, with the Tuva Man episode, I was not feeling it most of the time, and then I thought, man, I can't make anything good because I just don't feel good about it, and then I ended up making something great, and in my judgment, great. And
I'll second your judgment.
That's affirming.
That's
Thank you.
Probably my second Neighbors episode after the High Five. Second
awesome.
Favorite after
awesome.
That.
Well,
and a close second as well. I love that one.
And that's like surprising to me because I just wasn't feeling it, and so I'm saying all that to point out like that the grind thing is new to me, just turning around, and it's working, and that's really affirming. And so I want to keep that up and keep up a good pace and start planning ahead more. And part of what that looks like is I'm trying to do a lot of research into the refugee community in Nashville. And as I alluded to earlier, like when I tell a story, if I told your story, it's not your story, it's my story of you. And that's becomes more and more uncomfortable the farther away in terms of a community that I get. And so like with these refugee people, I'm like, I know so little about like what their house is like, what their pop culture knowledge is, where they come from, and there's so many different situations and communities, and it's something I want to know a lot more about. And I know that to do it like faithfully is going to take a lot of time. But that's something I'm really excited about, is just like getting to know the refugee population in town, which is like Bhutanese, Somali, Nepali, Burmese, Congolese, like all of these places. And it's right, like I live right in the neighborhood where there's so many different refugees. And yet I don't know a single one. And I'm angry at myself. It pisses me off that like that's my reality, that I drive by these like international grocery stores all the time, and maybe I've gone in once for chia seeds for my water or something. And I'm really excited about getting to know people that are in different communities than mine, even though they're in the same geographical location as me. So that's something that I am stoked on, I'm scared about, and really looking forward to just availing everyone of my ignorance, and hopefully somebody will be better because of it.
Well, I, for one, and I imagine a lot of other people out there, Jacob, are going to be looking forward to what's coming next from Neighbors and the Herd. And if folks want to check out Neighbors and the Herd, give them the quick rundown, if you would. Tell them where they can find all this great stuff.
Yeah, probably the best way now to check out the Neighbors is actually go to WPLN.org, and click on podcasts. WPLN is the Nashville Public Radio call letters. And then for the Herd, it's theherdradio.com, and that's HEARD. iTunes, Stitcher, all that good stuff. Yeah.
And you're on social media?
Yeah, I tweet at Neighbors Nash, and there's a Facebook page. And yeah, that's probably it.
Perfect. All those links are going to be in the show notes, folks, as I always say. So check them out as well. Jacob, thank you very much for taking the time to join me, man. This has been great getting to know more about this journey with Neighbors.
Dude, thank you. And I want to say, too, that seeing your recent roster of people is really cool also, of how, you know, you're a guy in Pennsylvania doing this show that, like, that's incredible.
It's literally out of my basement.
Yes.
My wife and kids are upstairs being quiet for me while I'm recording.
Yes. And I
you
totally relate to
in
that.
Your office. I am muting when I'm not talking so you don't hear my dog paws on the wood floor above me. So, yes, I am pretty amazed myself.
And that, man, that's the beauty of podcasting and the curse all at the same time. And I just think it's really cool. So, congratulations, man.
Well, thank you, Jacob. I really appreciate it. And folks, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you come back for more. And if you have enjoyed it, please a review on iTunes or Stitcher for this show, or if you hop over and check out Jacob with Neighbors or the Herd, I'm sure he wouldn't mind a review as well. It lets us know that you do enjoy what it is that we're bringing to you.
Yeah.
So, folks, that will do it for this week on the Podcast Digest. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen. I will be back again next week, as I like to say, with another great interview of a show that you will love. Until then, my name's Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest, and I will talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.